Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jim Tisch, and I work with the Agile Management BU at CA Technologies, and we are happy to sponsor today's webcast on the topic of understanding IT demand, the impact and balance on resource management. And before we start this morning, we just have a few housekeeping items to review. First, please submit your questions through the questions button, and we'll take the questions at the end of the presentation. And if we don't get to all of them, we'll have them answered by Brian or as a follow-up with a one-on-one with you. And then also after the webcast, there will be an email sent out with a recording on today's webcast, and we'll also be posting it in the community. So now it's my privilege to introduce our speaker, Brian. So Brian has 5 years of experience working locally at a large telecom in Dallas in a variety of roles in the product and project management space, including times as a financial analyst, a BA, and as a PM. He's been here with CA for the past 2 years now as a pre-sales consultant supporting CA PPM. And Brian, we're excited to hear your presentation today on discussing this important topic, so I'm going to send it over to you.
All right, thank you, Jim. 1 second while we get our Okay, so I want to thank everybody for joining today for our discussion on understanding IT demand. I know this is a bit of a tricky topic for some of our folks here, but it is essential because of where it falls in the project lifecycle. I know a lot of us know the easier and the sooner we catch the errors, the less impact they will have down the line. So for today's presentation, I'm going to start out with a quick introduction on what part of the solution we'll be talking about, and then we'll go into what are the goals of effective demand management. Following that, we'll have a quick discussion about some terminology that I find gets confusing for a lot of folks around resource management, and then we'll jump directly into a demonstration, and I'll walk through the things that we discussed during my presentation a little bit earlier. So let me step right into taking a look at what we'll be discussing today. CA PPM and our sister product Rally, we focus on removing the barriers between ideas and outcomes. And that's all about making sure that we have the visibility and the information we need to make those informed decisions and to see problems before they come up. And if I may, I'd like to steal a term that we have from our wonderful DevOps folks that work with our application development. And the idea here is that shift left that our DevOps folks are always talking about. Some of you may be familiar with what I mean by that, but in a life cycle of planning through the execution of a project, the earlier on that we can solve and fix problems and locate issues that might potentially affect our outcome, the less impact that's going to have on our costs, on our overruns, and things like that. So we're going to try and focus on as far left as we can go to eliminate those problems as soon as possible. So starting out with capturing our innovation and our ideas across our business, and then building out the business case and being able to accurately predict and measure if this is something that we would like to do and how it would fit into the business. And then next, we'll be able to move that on into a portfolio where we can really begin to sequence these projects and plan out our execution. Now, if we do that effectively, this entire project lifecycle will accelerate and we'll have higher project delivery and better velocity across all of our projects. So really, what are the goals of demand management? So good demand management starts with capturing innovation. And I know a lot of folks on the line here may not be using CA PPM for the actual capturing of the ideas themselves. You might be using another program to actually have your folks come in and submit these ideas. But regardless of where they're being captured, the main idea that I want to focus on here is you need to have one place where you can look at the entirety of your incoming demand. And why is that important? I think the main reason that that's important is we need to be able to see and have visibility into what we could be doing so we can make more effective decisions. And to take that a step further, we always are going to have more great ideas than we have resources that we have the ability to complete. And if we have an idea vault or a place where we can store our ideas, if a business opportunity opens up later on, we'll have that idea already ready to go, and again, be able to quickly move that in to an approved project and get that down on its execution. The second most important thing is estimating the scope, the effort, and the risk of these incoming demand items. This is also very important for being able to wrap our head around what kind of impact this is, and most importantly, should we even be doing this project? Estimating the scope, effort, and risk all fit right into enabling prioritization, because without those metrics and those different views being done accurately, we will have no way to effectively prioritize. And then finally, the last piece is a main goal is to enable effective resource planning. If we have a good idea of the demand of the demand on our resources from our incoming ideas, this will give us a better picture of what it's going to look like in the future and allow us to do some really effective management of our resources. And I think you'll find that it almost feels like magic when you get this working like clockwork, because you see things coming months in advance. Now, on the topic of effective resource planning, it all starts with the your availability of your resources, because how are you able to effectively say how much time we can assign to someone if we don't have a good idea of the availability? Now, these two graphs, the great Allison Poston presented at CA World. She gave a great presentation on best practices in resource management. This is a informal poll, and what I mean by that is this is just more of a perceptions graph. But something that was kind of funny that happened was after we showed this information at CA World, we had people come up to us and say, hey, this was actually the most accurate, one of the most accurate graphs that we saw on any presentation all day. And you can see people are most often overestimating the amount of time they have available for project work. So we are actually we think we have 2/3 of our time available to do project work, but in this case, it's actually only about 1/3 of our time. The only thing that we're actually really good at predicting is our vacation time, as you can see here, which I guess that makes sense, and that's something we all care about a lot. I wouldn't mind if this was just a little bit larger of a slice for our vacation time, but I digress. So the idea here is being able to nail down the availability of your resources. It's one of the most important parts in order to accurately predict and get people assigned on the right projects and be able to accurately report this back up to your stakeholders and the managers in your business. Now, how can we do that? Now, I know a lot of people, the main technique that's being used for availability is we use the resource calendar, right? We are saying out of an 8-hour day, our folks have 6.5 hours that they can devote to project work and 1.5 hours that they will be doing administrative type actions. Now, this works really great for a little while, but due to the inevitable change in business, oftentimes meetings are coming up, different administrative tasks are assigned, and we wind up losing a really big chunk of our availability, and that's not being captured in the system. So how can we alleviate this problem? One of the best ways that I've found, one of the best practices we have with clients, is the use of other work. And other work is very similar to a project as far as how it works in the system. We can assign a resource in other work, like an investment, and that way, when we are tracking, we will be able to see exactly what type of things or what things that they spent those hours on. This gives us a really great advantage at the end of a production cycle that we can look back to our managers and say, hey, we had X amount of hours doing this, this, and this. We really didn't have that availability in to do the project work. And it gives us much better visibility into what's actually going on and what's actually causing these delays. So moving on from availability into allocations and assignments. And these are two words that I see a lot of my clients sometimes use interchangeably, but there's an important distinction that I'd like to make between these two words. And I'll just talk a little bit briefly about, when we use one versus the other and their basic differences. So an allocation is the handshake of a resource manager with a project manager. This is, I would require 50% of one of your developers' time on my project. And the key point is we are allocating work to a project itself at the investment level. An assignment is once we have the work broke down to its smallest piece. So in the case of a waterfall project, a task, and then we will assign that task to an individual employee. So this is a truer estimate of work. This would be something like, I need Bob to complete this task, and it's going to take 6 hours. So the big distinction that I'd like to make is when we're talking allocations, we're talking at the investment level, and when we're talking assignments, we're talking at the task level. Okay, and then finally, the last piece of the 4 A's of resource management is actuals. Now, I know actuals might make a few people in the room stir a little bit because it does involve time tracking, and I know time tracking is not always everyone's favorite part of project management. But I do believe that in order to truly improve and become better at your resource estimation, you have to have actuals as a feedback to check yourself and see how well we are estimating. Because as actuals come in, every single life cycle will improve a little bit. We'll start to see where we're making mistakes, and we get better every single time we run a project. So I highly recommend using actuals, even if it's just for getting a better idea of how work is really being done in your business and where those hours are actually being spent. So now I'm going to move into what we call the planning horizon. Now, this is a typical, what it typically looks like in a business when they are moving through beginning to plan out their resources for investment. Now, the first step often is simply an FTE by role. We call that a headcount swag. Swag being, maybe not being a PMI term. I recommend maybe looking that up on your own time off work. But basically, it is a estimation or a guess of the amount of people that we might need on a particular project. So what we're looking at here is, hey, I need a half of a developer. I might need 3/4 of an architect, FTE, and I might need, 2 business analysts on this particular project. So it's that first level guess that what we think we might need as we're moving through. Now, when you start actually using CAPPM, we get that ability to bring that extra granularity to our long-term planning with allocations. So much more allocated than just, hey, I need a half of a developer. We'll say we need these 2 Java developers and a project manager from you, Mr. Resource Manager, and I'm going to need 50% of their time for the next 6 weeks. And you can already see how that communication that's happening there between the project manager and the resource manager is already aligning them and it's setting expectations for the impact of these projects moving forward. Then finally, when we actually have the work broken down into the lowest level and we have task assignments, that's where we can truly enable the most accurate resource planning. This tends to happen at the project phase. Once we have, maybe we're at an unimproved project and we have actually assigned out the work, we have formally requested our resources. This is when things start to become incredibly accurate and we can use this information effectively. And then finally, at the end, we have our actuals, which we'll use as a feedback loop to check on all the other steps that we went through and see how well we did. One last thing I wanted to bring up for everybody before we jump into the demonstration today is on April 19th, please join us for an introduction to our new resource manager persona presented by Doug Page. I know a lot of you have seen the new user experience that's available right now. We released in August. The first persona that we released was Nicole, our project manager persona, and we have now proud to release the new resource manager persona, and Doug will be stepping you through what you can expect to gain with this new resource manager persona and the new screens that you will be able to see. Doug is going to also be walking through the different things that we expect to bring in future versions as well. So it would be a great webcast to bring if you are a resource manager. I highly recommend joining us on April 19th for Doug's presentation. Okay, so from there, I'm going to jump directly into our demonstration, and we'll begin taking a look at how intake and domain can be used inside PPM itself. So I'm starting at a screen that some of you may be familiar with, which is the Project Manager Alert screen. And I'm starting here because I wanted to make a quick point about the way the system works and a way you can access the Idea Vault, maybe a different way than you have in the past. Now, our system is web addressable, and so what that means is each different page can have its own unique hyperlink. So I could send out this Create Idea hyperlink to anyone inside of my organization that has a license for CA PPM. And they can click in from maybe an email or maybe a SharePoint and be directed directly to this Create Idea page. And if they've been given the correct access rights, they'll be able to immediately submit an idea and get it inside the Idea Vault. Now you can see this is a very simple template. Doesn't require any type of training to be able to understand what we're doing here. We're going to be naming our idea. We're going to be selecting, some high-level typing and categorization information. And just a quick note on what the capabilities are here. We would be able to select from the idea type, and then categories would change to reflect. So under an application change, we would have different subcategories that we could choose from, and then we can see maybe a marketing project or a marketing idea. We would have a completely different list of things that we could choose. So after we've filled this out, we've given an idea of what the objective for the idea is and some high-level categorization. We could submit this idea for approval, and that's going to bring us into that Idea Vault that I began speaking about in the beginning. So here we have a list of all of the different ideas that we've collected across the system, and then the relevant data that we've been able to bring in about these ideas. So starting with our categorization and our idea typing, which will become very important in just a moment. I also want to point out that we have a priority score that we as an idea committee have come together and come up with, as well as financial information if you so choose. Now, I know a lot of people are not doing detailed financial information at this stage, and for this particular presentation, I'm not going to be diving in too much detail on the financial piece. We'll just be focusing on the impact on resources. Now, I also want to bring your attention to this status window where we can see what is approved, what's unapproved. So if I'm a manager, I can quickly scan through and find unapproved projects and step inside and see a little bit more detail behind. So I'm going to do that right now, and we'll look at a new required project request and see what we can do as far as building out our business case. So in the beginning here, we have that same information we saw when we first submitted the idea, but we'd like to be able to build a little bit of a more clear picture of what we're going to work with. So one of the ways we can do that is by building out on the Alignment and Risk tab. Now, I'm showing out-of-the-box content right now, but I want to make a very clear point that all of the things that you're seeing here are completely configurable. So if you have an idea scoring model that you would like to implement, or maybe architectural fit is just not something that you're interested in scoring on, you can remove these, we can change these, we can create new ones, and we can apply all of that template right here directly on this page. I know I've seen people with a scoring model as simple as a score 1 through 10, and I've also had customers such as Intel that had up to 30 different scoring metrics that all rolled up into one particular score. So the way this is working is we can sit down as a group and select how this idea, we see potential alignment factors and impacts, and these can all be used to roll up together to create a business alignment score that we can use later. I'm going to be focusing on this risk score that we have here, and we'll be looking at that a little bit later when we move into the portfolio, and we'll be using that in a risk scenario when we're prioritizing. So this is a great way to start that initial business case. I recommend highly that we come up with a standardized process for how we're scoring our ideas, and then as a committee we can make a decision on exactly how we'd like to score it, and setting that standard really gives us the ability to judge ideas on an equal playing field. And this is something that's really important because we're removing estimation, we're removing guesses, and we're replacing it as best we can with realistic data, which is always going to make more accurate decisions. Now, another thing we might like to do is take a look at what are the team members and the impact of team members that we'll be having from this idea. So I'm going to move over into the team member tab, and we'll start taking a look at how we can do this. So right now, I am just looking at roles, and right now we're looking at allocations since this is at the investment level. And of course, we have not broken this work down to a task, so we're not looking at ETCs and task assignments at this point. We're simply looking at what percentage of time during the time period of this investment will we be needing this resource. So here we have 3 resources, a developer, a project manager, and a test engineer, and we're going to be asking for 100% of their time across this time period of the investment. Now, this is done as a lot of resource managers like to refer to it as a peanut butter spread. So if we put 50%, it would break out 50% of the availability that we set of this resource across the time of the investment itself. So here we're just looking at high-level totals, but I also really like to show the ability to go into details at this point. So from here, we can break it out by a time scale. I'm currently showing it by month, but you can show this information all the way down to the week or the day or whatever time period that you would like. We also are showing it currently by total hours. So as I mentioned before, we can do this planning by FTE. We can do this planning by days. Really any way that you would like to take a look at this information, it can be quickly configured from right here. So just as a quick example, we can change this into an FTE for you. So I'll take a little bit closer of a look at how we can assign resources to an idea here in a little bit later when we look at resource planning. But for now, just know that when we are beginning to do a project, it is very, very easy to add a new resource and set our team up or our pool that we'll be pulling from for the project. Okay, so from there, I'm going to touch really quickly on we are satisfied with our team. We are satisfied with our business case. This is something that we would like to move forward with. So at this point, do we have a layer of governance to ensure that all of our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted, and this is something that we want to get done. So the way we support that is with a process flow. So let me give you an example of what that process flow could look like for an idea approval. So I know many of you have seen this before, but I want to quickly touch on the fact that these are automated. They are embedded in the system, and our workflow engine is not something that you'll have to go somewhere else to find. It is all located directly inside CA PPM, and these can be configured to match your exact processes. Now, in this case, you can see green is a step successfully executed, and yellow is a step that is currently running. So what we're doing here is we're validating our fields, which is a great thing to have. I know how many times have you submitted a request only to have it rejected 2 weeks later and say, hey, you forgot to fill out X, or you did not sign the bottom of this sheet, something that I have unfortunately faced a few times in my life. And this would automatically prevent such a thing. So we have certain fields that we've identified as critical, and if they're not filled out, it will automatically go right back to the requester. And they'll get notified that they have to go fix things. Now here we have one level of approval here. You can set up as many different levels as you'd like. So maybe you have an entire team or an escalation level of approval. All of that can be matched in this particular flow model. One last thing that I wanted to point out is this step up here, which is determine project template. And I want to recall back to that categorization that we did at the beginning of the idea. In that categorization, we were picking what type of project it was, and also we were looking at, what subcategory that it fit into. And we can have different templates that are available, and the system will automatically determine which template would be the most applicable for that particular type of project. You can see here we have a less than $10,000 fast track here. So you can also set to skip the approval flow and go directly to maybe a small or a fast-track template. Okay, so from there, I'm going to go back, and we'll move in, now saying that we've moved this idea on forward, and now we'd like to move into taking a look at our portfolio. So I'm going to go into a portfolio where we're looking at balancing this by resources. And I know a lot of you, again, this is not anything new to you, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time really diving into exactly all the details of this screen, but this, just a quick refresher, this is the waterline screen. It's a portfolio view. What we see is a list of investments on the left, and that gray line that's drawn across the screen represents the cut line, or where the projects that we'd like to execute. Anything above the line we can continue with right now, and things that are below the line are things that we would have to push off to a later date. So one of the issues that happens all the time to people is we have our committee, our portfolio committee, we sit down, we have a discussion, and we come up with a sequence set of projects. We all have agreed upon it, and then a new project will appear inside our portfolio. And then how do we reconcile that versus our previous plan? And you can see that exact scenario happening right now in front of you. So we see I have 16 projects that I have ranked, but we have that new required project request that came in from, when we submitted that process flow just a few minutes ago. So how can we get this project ranked without totally messing with our previous plan? Now, one of the ways that I recommend we do that is we begin taking a look at the impact that it's going to have on our resources. You can see that this new required project request has a very large impact of 688 hours on our engineer. And just to take a quick step back, each one of these projects has allocated engineer time to complete it. And then as a portfolio manager, I have set the total availability of all of my engineers. So I have my resource managers tell me how many hours do we have available, and I've set that as my portfolio target. And you can see that in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen down here, which is our distributed target here of 1677 hours. That's how much engineering capacity we have to get work done. So we can begin taking a look at, hey, where are we going to run out of resources for our engineer? Now, currently, you can also see just to the right of that engineer number, that risk score that we calculated a little bit earlier. Now, if we had a business, an idea score that we had, a multiple feature alignment, like I was explaining, we have 30 different things that all roll up into one idea overall score. That could be brought in here too. Very simple to do. And we can have the system key off of these and automatically rank these in order. So one of the ways we do that is by defining the ranking rules here, and I'll quickly show you what that looks like. Here I have approved and required, and I have my primary constraint as a test engineer. So I'm going to return and run these ranking rules, and it's going to automatically help me out to find where this new project should go. So you can see it's automatically sequenced it at number 3, and it's adjusted where our water line is going to be here. So now we only have 4 projects before we run out of our engineering time. Now I can take this a step further and begin taking in this risk number into effect in the automatic ranking rules, and we can begin looking at it from that perspective as well. Now, I didn't want to spend too much more time really digging into how the water line works. I think most people are familiar with that. But what I did want to show is a feature that I think most people are maybe not aware that we have, and that is the ability to add in our additional, I'd like to add into our additional aggregations here, And when I select the engineer aggregation, I can begin to see the impact across time in my Gantt chart. So another thing I can do is add these directly to the bars themselves. Let me expand this so we can see a little bit better here. But now I can begin to see very easily where this impact is occurring and how this is going to affect me moving forward. So I highly recommend it when you're doing portfolio planning and you have a resource that is a big bottleneck for your business, highly recommend using this view and getting these numbers on the screen like we see here. It makes it very easy to know when I want to move things out really quickly how that's going to impact overall on our resources. Okay, so from portfolio, we saw how we can initially score an idea and build up the business case and begin getting users allocated to our projects. And then we saw how we can use some of that same information that we used earlier in the portfolio to effectively prioritize on those ideas. Now that we have a list of projects we'd like to execute on and they're approved, the next step is going to be our long-term resource planning. So let me go into our resource planning, and we'll take a look at how you can use CA/PPM to get visibility into resources out into the future. Okay, so this is a very typical view you'd expect for a resource manager to see inside CA/PPM. I know a lot of you probably also have seen this before, or at least I hope you have if you're a resource manager. It's one of my favorite views because it makes it incredibly easy to see where problem area is and how and exactly where to focus my time as a resource manager. So what we're seeing here is I am a resource manager controlling a team of architects. And I have it currently set to show in week intervals the amount of work from a perspective of their capacity or their availability, like we spoke of earlier, versus the current demand that they'll be having or allocation that they're currently assigned towards investment. And a red area indicates that they are currently allocated to more work than they have the ability to complete. Now you can see poor Joyce here. We're being very mean to Joyce, and Joyce has almost, it looks like she has 60 hours more of work than she could possibly commit in 1 week. So we have Joyce working 30-hour days. I'm sorry about that, Joyce. But you know, it's funny, but this is actually really how it looks like in a lot of my customers' businesses, and especially in my experience as an analyst, you would always see one individual that has a bar that looks like this, and then you see another individual that might have a bar that looks a little bit more like this. So how can we rectify the situation, and how does CA/PPM help us solve this problem? And the way it does that is with what we call the resource finder. And the resource finder brings up a couple of different options to help us find replacement resources to alleviate overcapacity people. So let me click into this time period, and I'm going to expose all the different investments that we have Joyce currently allocated to. And just like we saw before, Joyce is a very busy lady. She is working on several different investments all at the same time. So we're going to have to get her some relief, and let's start with one of these larger projects, this online order entry. It looks to me like even if we get this one off of her plate, she's still going to be a little bit over allocated, but just to show you an example of what it works like, I'm going to start here. So I click on our resource finder to the left, and this is going to bring up our resource finding tool. Now, it already knows that the role that we're looking for is an architect. So it's populated a list of architects that have availability in the time period that we're requesting. So automatically looking at that information we entered in earlier and knowing the time frame, knowing all of the allocations of all the other resources in our system, it's going to populate this list automatically. And depending on the amount of data that you track under individual resources, you can make the search for the right resource as detailed as you would like. And what I mean by that is here we're simply looking for role and availability. But, you know, you might have an available architect that is in New York, and that does not help us very much in Los Angeles oftentimes. So we can constrain it again by location. We can constrain it again by skill set. which I think is something that lets us really get to that extra level, because, just because they're an architect does not mean they may have the correct skills in order to get the job done. Everybody knows in a business, generally on a team, you always have experts in certain areas. So in order to make the best resource decisions, I highly recommend being able to look at the skills. And CAPPM makes it very, very easy to score people's aptitude towards skills. Very quickly, I'll just mention how that works. When you first enter in a skill, you simply select what their proficiency is on that skill, and then basically, how interested they are in that particular topic. So you can, if I needed a developer who was a 10 out of 10 in Java, I could set that in here, and that would help me make the right decision moving forward. So we saw that Mike Jones was the one architect that didn't have much work. So I'm going to replace him on the project. And then we can really quickly see some of that impact being removed from Joyce on down to Mark. So let me close this out. We can see that her red bar has moved down a little bit. Now it looks like we did finally get Mike some work, and he looks like he's going to be a busy guy now from now on. Joyce, we still need to do a little bit more balancing in the beginning, but I think that, she's going to stop pulling her hair out now and be a little bit happier of an employee. Okay, so one last thing I wanted to show on these screens is this same type of work and this same type of planning can be done at the role level as well. So we don't have to look at this at resources. And I know a lot of people might skip over on this tab, but this is that same type of information viewed at a top level of just roles. So we can look and see the impact on how we're doing. And this is really important in making decisions on, are we staffed properly, and is there going to be any big bottlenecks in the road? It looks like right now, from what we're seeing, there's a lot of assignments that could be added on potentially here. Now, I know a lot of you may be thinking, hey, Brian, that last screen was really cool. I'd like to show that type of information to my boss. It would be great if I could just point to it and say, hey, here's where the issue is. And in our advanced reporting, we have that exact type of information available. So if you have ever seen the capacity versus demand by resources report, this is one of the reports that we make available in our PMO Accelerator. And it's something that I highly recommend using because it just has exactly what you need. Just like that other view, we can see a complete list of all the investments that each resource is looking at, and then we can see how that is affecting their capacity moving forward across different months. Now, right now, again, I have it set to hours, but these reports are very flexible. So maybe, you have one boss that is very interested in looking at it by hours, but you have another boss that wants to see it in FTE. You have the ability to just change that on the fly and update that information. So one other thing I wanted to show is, yes, we do have this looking at it by capacity demand by resource, but we also have this same type of information available by role. So again, something that you might want to share upwards. This is something, the type of report that you could create or that is created to be able to share that information very easily with your boss or maybe his boss, and let him know where our big areas of problems are. Because if we see something like this, we have a developer team with 2,000 hours, this is going to be a really big problem. In my demonstrations that obviously we are still in June time frame, but if we saw this coming up, let's say this was December 17th, we could know that, hey, we're going to have to focus on staffing this up. We might have to hire some contractors, but something's going to happen or else we're going to run into some really bad problems in December. Okay, so now we were able to see the beginning of how we can create an idea and how we can collect all that information and innovation across our business to make sure we're not losing out on any of that potential success and potential projects that we could be doing. Then we saw building out a business case and getting team members assigned to the different roles. Then after that, we moved the idea through a process flow and into a portfolio where we used that business case to do some sequencing and prioritization of our work. Once we had a good idea of what projects we were going to work on, we were able to take a look at our resources across the future and use that allocation information to balance workloads at the role level. So now I am going to open it back up for the Q&A. So let me move back here, and I will, I guess, Jim, do we have any questions that have currently come in? And
yeah, Brian, there is one question here about a lot of ideas coming into the pipeline. So they say we have over 1,000 ideas in our pipeline. How do we, how well do you see the techniques you showed today scaling up?
That is an absolutely great question. I think not only do I see CAPPM scaling better than our other competitors, I think that it's impossible to scale without using some of the techniques that we saw here. There is just simply no way that you'll be able to wrap your mind or be able to gain a good picture into that much incoming ideas unless you are doing these different layers of planning and building out the individual cases. There's simply too many decisions to be made and too many moving parts. It all needs to go inside the system. So I think the value of what we looked at today is even more for someone who might be going through 1,000 hours at a time, 1,000 ideas at a time.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. I just want to remind the people attending the webinar that you can go to the Q&A and you can answer questions right there, and Brian can answer those. Here's another question. My business collects all of our ideas in Salesforce.com. Could we have them migrate to CAPPM? Could this migration be triggered by a % probability of close?
Yeah, so if you, this is something we see very common, is people have a Salesforce.com, especially in professional service organizations. They have their opportunities oftentimes stored in Salesforce. And so what we tend to do is, just like you mentioned, when it reaches a certain point of the probability of close, like maybe an 80% probability of close, we can have that immediately kick over and move that idea into CAPPM, into that idea vault that we saw at the very beginning.
Okay, Brian, one last question here. If I manage my ideas in CAPPM, how does that information get into my Agile Central or Rally system?
That is a great question, because I know a lot of people here are using both systems. And so the way that works is we like to take the initial planning and that initial prioritization piece when we're making decisions at a high level all the way through to where it becomes an approved project. And then once we have an approved project, that often is what is integrated into Rally as a portfolio item. So generally, we take this first planning piece inside PPM, and then once we become confident enough that this is something that we would like to work on, it fits into our strategic alignments, we send out that portfolio item over into Rally, where the work can be broken down by sprint so we can do our story planning and things of that nature.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. I just want to remind everyone, too, that there's a poll on to rate today's webcast. I want to tell Brian, thank you very much. This is an important topic, and we appreciate your time reviewing this with everyone, and also to remind everyone about the upcoming webcast in April, where we'll also take a deeper dive into 15.2 and some of the resource management capabilities in the next release. So again, Brian, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for participating today.
Hey, Jim, there was one last question.
Okay.
Just curious, Brian, what version of CAPPM is the demo done on? It must have come in.
Yeah, sure. The demo was demonstrated on 15.1.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.